So, laws of aversion, framing effects, prospect theory, those suggest that people don't always make fully rational choices. They actually make choices based on the way in which they weigh losses and gains. Now, are people entirely irrational in their decision making, however? The answer, claims Herb Simon, is no, they're not. What he proposed is the concept of what's called bounded rationality. And the idea is the following: if you give people fairly simple decisions, they are perfectly capable of being rational. So people will actually display rational decision making within the limits of human cognitive processing. So if people have, infinite memory, or if the problem that they're being posed is actually within the scope of their memory capacity, and they have time available to them to contemplate the different options, people are actually quite good at making rational decisions. However, if the complexity of a problem actually exceeds those capabilities and exceeds the amount of time that they have available to them, then people are going to make mistakes. And the way in which people are going to make errors is actually going to reflect the particular limits of human information processing. So let me just make this more straightforward for you. Let's say I give you the option between either I give you $0 or I give you $10. Obviously, none of you guys are going to tell me I would like $0, right? Because that's a very simple problem. When problems become more complicated, they may exceed, actually specifically, the limits of our working memory capacity. And that is when we'll start resorting to some strategies that are kind of like what they call fast and frugal. They don't cost a whole lot of cognitive effort. They typically lead to reasonably decent decision making, but they're not necessarily optimal. So how do these choice strategies work? Well, the idea is that we use them. They may be suboptimal, but they will actually help us deal with limitations in our processing abilities and in our available time in an effective manner. And I'll talk about a couple of them. First of all, satisficing, then elimination by aspects, then some biases, and then some heuristics. So what does the notion of satisficing refer to? Well, when people make more complex decisions, the idea is that they have a limited set of criteria in their mind that are relatively important. And then they have some idea of how acceptable each of these different criteria is and how important these criteria are for them. And then what happens is, as we start looking through all the possible options, rather than going through every single possible option that's available on the entire planet, we actually will stick to the first option we come across that actually is acceptable or that satisfies each of the criteria that we had in mind. So this is smart because this requires much less cognitive effort than what we would need to do if we actually optimized. We used every single possibility. We'd have to calculate every expected utility for each possible decision we could make. It would take us a very long time to do so. So again, let me make this very straightforward for you. Let's say I ask you, what are you going to eat for dinner tonight? Well, in reality, there's an infinite number of options available because there is an infinite number of possible foods in the world. And in principle, you could find the absolute optimal solution so that maybe, you're going to eat an absolutely delicious steak that is made just right and it's just the right price and so forth. Of course, we don't do that on the daily. Instead, what we do is maybe something like this, like, let's see, today is Monday. Monday, I'm kind of busy early in the day. I typically don't have a lot of time to go to the grocery store or to cook. So for tonight, what I will do is just a quick meal. I'll stop at the campus cafeteria, eat their bowl of pasta for the night, and then I'll go to the gym. Because that satisfies whatever criteria I had in mind. It's not super expensive. It's not going to take me a lot of time. It's, if I throw some vegetables in, not super unhealthy. So it satisfies those criteria and it will do the job. Is it the absolute optimal meal for me that night? Not necessarily, but it does the job. So satisficing is a fantastic way of making life less complicated, right? You pick the first option you come across that does the job, that's the one you go with. Another strategy that makes decision making more straightforward is what's called elimination by aspects. And if we make a decision where we have a lot of different options, it is very helpful to actually write down some attributes that are important to us, then rank these attributes, and then go through them one by one as you're eliminating different options. So let's say we're going shopping for a car. Well, cars have a lot of different attributes because they come in all sorts of shapes and forms. We can have a lot of attributes that we care more or less about. And of course, there's some obvious ones, like a car needs to have four wheels. That's not really on the radar, right? Unless you come across a car that doesn't have four wheels, then it may become important to you. But let's say we skip all of that, needs to have a steering wheel, all of that. But if you think about some attributes that are certainly important when you buy a car, probably some of them that you would think of are price, right? Maybe you'll say, okay, it can't be more than, let's say, $20,000 or $30,000 or $10,000, one of those, right? There's a number. That price is maybe your first important attribute, and it's going to knock out a whole bunch of cars right from the get-go. So we start with the entire universe of cars available to us, and let's now say our first attribute is price, and let's say we say $20,000. Any car above it is now out and we're not going to consider any further. So say goodbye to your Lamborghinis and Rolls Royces. Those are out at the first attribute. We have eliminated anything that's more than $20,000. Now let's think maybe the second attribute for us is miles per gallon, or heck, maybe even we want to just go straight for the electric car. So let's say we want an electric car. This knocks out every single car that uses gas. So now we have way fewer cars available and left to choose from. Then comes the next attribute, and you keep going through that list until there's only one left, right? So we have an enormous set of options. We remove them as we go through attributes. First, all the cars that don't fit the first attribute are knocked off. Then we have a set left. We go to the second attribute, and we keep going through attributes until we only have one car left. So here's some attributes, right? I mean, of course, that's personal to you which ones are important and which ones are not. But the idea is that we rank these attributes, start with the most important one, and then start eliminating by these aspects until there's one choice left. Now, this is very, very stereotypical and helpful in the way in which people make actual decisions like this. So this is very helpful, this concept, and so much so that Herbert Simon actually also won the Nobel Prize, and also in economics, and also for his contributions to actual human behavioral economics. How do people actually make decisions? Again, this changed the way in which people thought about human behavior, and economists specifically, right? Knowing how people go through all of their options is very useful when you think about the way in which people are going to behave when it comes to consumerism. It also is useful when you think about people's behavior in other settings.